Hello, everyone. I have the pleasure today of interviewing David Suich. David is a retired engineer and certified spiritual counselor who founded and operated Steps of Hope Outreach, a nonprofit organization that served orphanages in Nepal, Mexico, and Haiti from 2003 to 2018. During a painful and chronic physical condition that triggered severe depression, he clicked on a YouTube video about an atheist who died momentarily and saw heaven. This led him on a 15-year journey of research into the near-death experience, including the testimonies of over 1,000 people who have died, seen the afterlife, and returned.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for inviting me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here on Lamplighter. It all started when I got chronic tendonitis back in 1999. I was working as an analyst, as a consultant for small-scale power plants, and I had a lot of hand work, and I got tendonitis in my hands. I had to have carpal tunnel surgery, and then it moved to my jaw and then my feet. And over about an 8-year period, it got really bad, and I was out of work for a couple of weeks, very depressed. I had prayed, with many churches, hundreds of people, probably a dozen or so churches trying to get healing, and it wasn't working. And I came to a very painful conclusion. I thought, well, one of two things is going on here. Either there is no God, or more likely there is a God, but, I'm not a good Christian, and I'm the child that God's embarrassed of. I want nothing to do with you because you've been a bad son, that kind of deal. And YouTube was fairly new back then in 2007. And in this painful condition, I was kind of going between the bed and the chair because if I was in one position too long, it was painful. And I clicked on a random YouTube video that came up in my feed. Now, today, there's dozens of channels about near-death experiences, but back then it was hard to find them. And I clicked on a random video about a guy who was an atheist. He died, found himself in the afterlife, a very negative experience. He called out to heaven for help and was rescued. And he didn't really display any signs of lying or not being authentic. And it really got my curiosity. And so I started doing searches on YouTube, and I'd find maybe one a week. I mean, now there's more than you could spend time reading if you spend every day watching YouTube videos on near-death experiences. But I was very intrigued by it, and I just started studying them. And as I began talking to my family and friends about them, I would hear, oh, this person there said they had an experience. Oh, and this guy, across the street said it happened to him. And to my shock and amazement, a relative on my dad's side of the family had an NDE when he was in World War II. And then my own aunt had a near-death experience when she gave birth to my cousin. And she had never told me about it. These people don't talk about their experiences. They're getting more comfortable now because it's becoming more common. But back then, 15 years ago, people would think you were crazy if you were talking about this afterlife stuff and this beautiful light and love. And so as I studied these experiences, I started, interviewing people and that kind of thing. And I thought, well, I need to get this information out there because there were quite a few books about people's individual near-death experiences. And then there were lots of high quality, high-end spiritual books that were very esoteric, but you had to really be advanced spiritually to understand them. And there wasn't anything that was sort of a spirituality 101. So I decided, well, I'm going to write a book about this. And that's when it really snowballed. And it was quite an amazing experience because when you study near-death experiences, it changes your life as well, not to the extent of having a near-death experience, but you get to have all the same qualities. You tend to focus more on meaningful relationships and unconditional love and that kind of thing. I mean, I still have a long way to go learning about unconditional love, but it was quite an amazing experience. And I learned so much. And even little things happen, like when I was out looking for a car, the salesman, he had one arm missing, and I didn't ask him about it. He says, oh, I had a water skiing, accident. I fell off as I was water skiing, and the boat behind us ran over my arm. I arrived DOA at the hospital. I said to him, well, did you see your body from above? Did you go through a tunnel? Did you see the light? And he said, that happened to you too? I said, no, I'm just writing a book about it. So we stopped what we were doing, and he told me his experience. So yeah, I've run across all sorts of people in life who didn't want to talk about it because they thought nobody would believe them. And then, when they realize you're going to believe them, they kind of open up. So it's been a wonderful journey. It really has.
Wonderful. Thank you. So my first question relates to guess what we commonly refer to as heaven and hell, which I recognize is a pretty controversial area, especially with the terminology. But I know I've studied a lot of these NDEs myself, and I've got like 20 books on my shelf. And what I've noticed is that there's usually a gate or some kind of barrier that they can't cross beyond. But before that gate, we get all the information about what happens before. And you talk a lot about that in your book. And can you just talk a little bit about what you've learned in your book about what we call heaven and hell before we get to that barrier place?
Sure. I actually like to quote the 1980s movie Defending Your Life, where a guy dies and he finds himself in the afterlife and he's talking with someone. He says, "Is this heaven?" He says, "No, it's not heaven." He says, "Well, is it hell?" He says, "No, it's not hell, but I hear Los Angeles is getting pretty close. No such thing as hell." Well, there really is no such thing as heaven or hell. There are just various realms in the afterlife created by the collective group of consciousnesses that are there. And so souls tend to congregate together, like-minded, like vibration. And some people may visit lower vibrational realms when they die. It's not a punishment. It's not a judgment. Every experience we have, whether here on earth or in the afterlife, is beneficial to the advancement of our consciousness. And out of I've probably heard around 1,200 testimonies. It was 700 at the time I wrote my book. And about 95% of those were positive experiences or heavenly experiences, and about 5% were negative. And it's really interesting. There are some negative experiences where the person died and they were having a very negative experience, and maybe they were going into fear, like, what's going on? I'm in this dark place and that kind of thing. And as soon as they calm down and say, "Oh, I must be dead," and they calm down, the experience immediately becomes positive. But what typically happens in an NDE, and to say typical, that's really not a very accurate thing, because every near-death experience is very unique. So heaven will create an environment and an experience that makes the person feel comfortable. So if you are a big fan of nature, you'll probably be brought into one of heaven's beautiful gardens where there are flowers and trees and green grass, and all the flowers glow with their own light and they sing. And, these gardens are very beautiful. People describe them as being like 100 times more beautiful than Yosemite. And for those who don't know, Yosemite National Park is a park in California. People come from all over the world to see it. It's one of the most beautiful parks in the world. And so the beauty of heaven is indescribable. And some people have, life reviews, others just meet with relatives, some, meet with God, some merge with God, some are in a realm of heaven that's kind of laid out somewhat like earth. And there are a lot of common elements. So let's talk about some of the common elements. First, there are the senses. So when people die and they come out of their body, and they've talked about the experience back here on earth, and people ask them, "Were you like a ghost?" And no, I was the exact opposite of a ghost. They say I felt more real and more alive than I've ever felt in my life. This was like the height of existence, filled up with life. Some people say, "Oh, you had a hallucination." Well, it's pretty obvious it's not a hallucination. When you're dreaming, you think your dream world is real. And then when you wake up, you go, "Oh, this is the real world. This is much more clear." So that's what it's like. It's like taking a huge step up to a higher level of consciousness. Your emotions are more intense. Your thoughts are more clear. And the senses, let's talk about that. So colors. People say they saw colors in heaven that don't exist here. Beautiful, vibrant pastels and tons of colors that don't exist. It took me a while listening to near-death experiences to finally get an idea of that. We have 3 colors on Earth, 3 primary colors: red, blue, and yellow. And a mixture of those 3 colors form all the colors of a rainbow. In that first level of heaven that's kind of laid out somewhat like Earth, there's over 80 primary colors. So just the sight is a buffet for the senses. And there are parks and gardens, as I mentioned. There's buildings and streets and cities and mountains. And there's trees that tower far larger than our giant sequoias and redwoods. And it's just an amazing, beautiful place. Now, you do have hearing there, and some people have described the beautiful music Don Piper, in his book, 90 Minutes in Heaven, he was a pastor who had a near-death experience from a fatal car crash. He had a really good description of the music. And he said that our best music here on earth, our most beautiful music, compared to the music in heaven, sounds like a child banging on a pan with a stick. And so your hearing is really more for the music of heaven, because there's a mind-to-mind communication that it's impossible to have a misunderstanding. And of course, there are the smells of heaven. People have described the beautiful scents, and some people meet religious figures or dead relatives. And probably the most intriguing thing about this is the love they describe. So there's all these emotions. There's a love that's indescribable in human words. It's so strong that even the word love is completely inadequate to describe it. I had one guy say, imagine the 100 happiest moments of your life and put them all into one moment. You don't come close to what it's like to be there. And another one said, if you were here on earth and you had a magic lamp with a genie, instead of 3 wishes, you had unlimited wishes. You could wish for anything on earth. He said, you wouldn't be nearly as happy as you are there. So there's also a feeling of peace. There's a feeling of purposefulness, that everything that happens to us, even here on earth, has a purpose. There are ideas that are transmitted to these people. They say things like they were shown or told there's a perfect plan and it's working itself out in its perfection. And another thing that I hear that I really love about these experiences is they say there is no judgment. Regardless of how badly a human being behaved, regardless of our decisions to act in light or darkness, when we arrive in heaven, we are loved unconditionally. There is not a single thing that any human being could do to make our Heavenly Father love us one bit less. And we have these earthly experiences for the purposes of learning and growth and to advance our consciousness. And it's not a test. It's not a pass-fail, where if you fail, you get burned in hell. There are hellish experiences, but they're only temporary for the purposes of learning and growth. So yeah, the heavenly experiences are beyond human words. We've all experienced it before. We came from heaven. We had these earthly lives that we're experiencing now, and that's where we go back home. People report a feeling of familiarity. This is where I came from. I'm home. I'm back where I belong. And of course, even soldiers who died in a war, big tough guys with tattoos and muscles, some of them, when they start talking about the beauty of heaven, they cry, because it's that amazing and that indescribable. So yeah, it's quite an amazing place. I'm looking forward to many years from now to the day when I get to go back home.
Yeah. So I really like some of the ways you explain that there, that the so-called hellish experiences, that it's a part of learning and growth, and it's not really forever. And just as a side note, I've done a little bit of biblical study, trying to understand better what's in the biblical narrative, and the word that's used for eternal and the eternal hell and things like that is actually aeon, which just means a long time, but it can also mean forever. So it depends on how you interpret it. So that's an interesting bit. I've done a lot of work trying to reconcile those. I know that some of the NDEs have talked a little bit about the Bible too. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. One man, that first testimony that I mentioned, that I clicked on, he had met with Jesus and about 7 or 8 angels, and Jesus is not quite like the Jesus that I was taught about in religion. So he's a really easygoing, loving, wise, beautiful spirit. And from everything I've learned from near-death experiences, Jesus is kind of like the core of God, who acts as an advocate or a helper with human beings, and he works with us directly. Well, this man, Howard Storm, in his testimony, he asked Jesus about the Bible. He says, is it true? And Jesus said, yes, it's true, but it has to be read in a spiritual sense. And of course, the Bible, according to channelers like Cryon, channeled by Lee Carroll, he said the Bible was channeled. So channeling is a kind of a dirty word for religion, but really that's what Christianity believes. They say the Bible's the word of God. So they believe somebody got a message from God and they wrote it down. Well, channeling is just speaking the message. So it's kind of the same thing. But there are many, many spiritual truths in the Bible. There are things that we might often misinterpret. So, for instance, when I was a Christian for many years, and I still like the religion, I think Christians are wonderful people in general. And I still hold on to a lot of those beliefs because they're very in line with what I've learned from near-death experiences. But like one of the things, be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Well, I interpreted that the way my religion taught me, which is, you better obey God or there's going to be consequences. Well, no, they're talking about a basic spiritual law. Whatever human being focuses on, whatever they want, whatever their perspective is, whatever the emotion is, that kind of goes out into the universe, gets multiplied by 10 and comes back to you. So if you go around being selfish and cruel, manipulative, you're going to be surrounded by selfishness, cruelty, and manipulation. And if you go around being loving and kind and compassionate to others, you're going to be surrounded by love and kindness and compassion. And, it's kind of like the law of attraction. So there's a lot of truths in the Bible that means something different to me now after studying near-death experiences. And of course, there are things in there that I really like. 1 Peter 4:8, love covers a multitude of sins. 1 John 4:7, everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. We think of religion as, oh, I better pick the right one. That's not how it thinks about it. Religion is a tool. And some people prefer the structure of religion in order to connect with God, and heaven's okay with that. But heaven is not invested in the dynamics of religious structure as we here on earth. The mind of God cannot be fathomed. It's not the mind of a human being. It is pure light, love, and compassion. It does not have judgment. It does not have anger. It doesn't even have expectation. It has hope for us that we'll have a good life and a good learning experience, but it only loves. And so many of the world's major religions talk about the same things you hear in these near-death experiences. The good sects or the good sections of these religions, brotherly love, charity for the impoverished, peace, joy, compassion, forgiveness, self-control. And so, my wife is a great cook. She never uses a recipe. I'm a lousy cook. If I don't follow the recipe, food's not going to be edible. Some people need that recipe. Some people need the religious structure, and there's no judgment from heaven. It's almost like, and this is an example from Lee Carroll, who channels Cryon. He gives a really good description of how God feels about religion. So imagine that you are in a bitter divorce, and out of spite, your spouse gets custody of your young children, and, bitter divorce, he's going to take them far away from you. You're never going to see your kids again. And you look for your children for years. You search for years and years, and you finally give up in vain. And here it is 15 years later. They're all grown up. And you get a phone call one day, and it's them. And they say, we've been looking for you all these years. We're in your neighborhood right now. Can we come and see you? Well, you're overjoyed. It's like the best day of your life. You're going to see your kids again. And so you go out into the street and you look, and there's a car coming, and it's them. Now, let me ask you something. Do you care about what kind of car it is? Do you care if it's a perfect car in really good running condition or a broken down old car with a lot of problems? You don't care. You're just happy that your children are coming to see you. And that's how God feels about it. If a person's in a religion with a lot of mistaken doctrines and messed up beliefs, heaven doesn't care. They're just happy you're trying to connect with God. God does not have judgments about our judgments. Anybody who seeks, just like the Bible says, seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open. If you look for God, you're going to find him. And if you do it through religion, then that's fine. And if you don't use religion at all, that's fine. And even if you're an atheist or an agnostic, there's no judgment about that. Heaven doesn't have judgments about our judgments. Everybody believes in love, and love is part of God. Everybody sees a different part of God. Every religion sees a different part of God. We never see the whole of God from our earthly perspectives. And so, Christianity is a wonderful religion. I like Buddhism as well. I like the Quakers, but I think there's good people in every religion. And Christianity certainly, at least the part of Christianity that I was in was really fostering love and teaching about unconditional love. Same thing I learned from near-death experiences. So I have a great deal of respect for the Bible and Christianity.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, what you said made me think of a biblical story. Your story of the example of seeing your kids again. It's a lot like the prodigal son. And how does God feel about the boy that spent all his time wasting away his inheritance? Absolutely loving, absolutely loving. You just come to him. You just turn to him again in humility, and bam, there he is, just like in the NDEs, instantly. So thank
Yes.
you. Yeah, it
And
matches
even
right up.
Jesus, he's on the cross, and the guy next to him has been a thief his entire life. He's been
Yeah,
nothing but a bad person, causing misery in the lives of others and stealing from people. And he doesn't ask for forgiveness. All he does is hint around. He says, Jesus, remember me when you're in your Father's kingdom. And what does Jesus say? He turns to him and says, today you will be with me in paradise.
right.
Our Father's love is not dependent on anything that we
Perfect.
do, good or bad, down here.
So I really like how in your book you really focus on what I think of as Jesus's main message, which is to be a loving person, and which is also the message of all the life reviews that I've seen. And I really appreciated that. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you've learned from the life reviews, about what, as Howard Storm would say, what made God happy and the angels happy, and what didn't, and how we can be just a more loving person in everyday life, just from what you've learned in your experience.
Okay, so life review is a very interesting part of the near-death experience, and about a fourth of the people I've talked to had life reviews. And I believe personally that the only reason why they all didn't have life reviews is because those in heaven knew they were sending them back. So the life review is probably something that when we finish our lives completely, we go through this life review. And it's not a judgment, it's a learning experience. So in this world, you are one person, you. So I'm seeing through my eyes, hearing through my ears, and so forth. Well, in this life review, you go through your whole life from beginning to end. Now, some people just experience some highlights, and other people re-experience everything they've ever said, thought, did, and felt. Now, there's no time in heaven, and which is something all near-death experiencers say. It's only an illusion. So it happens very fast. Some people describe it as a panoramic life review. But in this life review, you are you, and simultaneously the people around you that you've interacted with. And that even goes so far as to be with animals or even plants. So, for instance, one woman, she was on her way to work in the morning, and this was back east in the days before cell phones, and it was a cold winter day, and somebody needed a jump start. They were on the side of the road. Now, I grew up in Ohio, and you'd hear every so often, every few years about somebody dying in the cold because the car broke down and nobody came to stop them. So it was a dangerous thing if you didn't get help. So this woman, she's on her way to work in a life review, and she stops and helps the stranded motorist and gives him a jump start and thinks nothing of it. And in her life review, she saw it from the perspective of the motorist, felt everything that woman felt who was stranded. Like, oh, nobody's coming to help. What's going to happen to me? And all of a sudden, this angel comes and stops and helps. And of course, it extends to things like, even your job. One man, after his first near-death experience, he had two, he became a hospice worker. So he was helping these elderly people near their end of life. And when he got to that part of his life review, it was like emotional fireworks, because some of these elderly people, the other workers didn't talk to him much, and he was nice to them, and, was always helping them out and asking them how they were. And he said it was like emotional fireworks. So you feel the feelings of the other people in reaction to what you said and did. And it even extends to animals. One woman, when she was a little girl, she tied a ribbon around her dog's neck. Now, she didn't mean to hurt the dog, but she tied it too tight. And in her life review, she experienced being the dog with that choking feeling around her neck the whole day. And so these life reviews are to show us something very important, that everything we say and do with another human being has an effect, good or bad. And when we are loving people, considerate of others, and we treat our fellow human beings with kindness and compassion, it makes all of heaven joyful, and we experience the good feelings of the people around us as if we were them. And when we're cruel and selfish and manipulative, we feel the effect of that. And so what they are trying to teach us is just what you were alluding to earlier, is that it's all about love. I mean, when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's the summary right there of every near-death experience. It's all about love. And love is the very substance of God. It is a quantum measurable energy. And one of the reasons we have these physical lives is because in heaven, we're all connected. So we're more connected than separate. We're all one. We're all little facets of God. We are all facets of creation. And down here on earth, we have the illusion of separateness for the purposes of learning. So here we have a choice that we don't have in heaven, because we have an illusion of separateness. So let's take an example here. If you have a dog, you can choose to kick the dog, or you can choose to pet the dog. Well, what if you are connected to that dog? You feel everything the dog feels everything you feel. Well, the dog can't choose to bite you because it's going to feel the pain just as much as you do. And you can't choose to kick the dog because you're going to feel the pain just as much as the dog does. And so even though you have freedom in heaven, you don't really have that free will choice. And when the infinite creator that is made of infinite love has that choice, and the human being chooses the path of love instead of fear, chooses kindness over cruelty, when that choice occurs, that's what builds creation. That's what causes the creation process to continue. And I have heard from near-death experiencers that by what we're doing here, these very difficult physical lives, we're in this perfect place of heaven where we have perfect bodies, perfect health, joy, peace, love beyond description. And we come down here, it's kind of like hell compared to heaven. We suffer down here a lot. Well, by coming down here to experience free will between love and fear, it's a fear-love duality. And when we make that choice of love, not only is that helping the fractal of God grow, the fractal of creation grow, but it's also holding the space for the love of heaven to exist. So one tiny portion of creation has to experience the opposite of love for creation to be complete. Now, I don't understand that completely. And please don't ask me in the comments for more details, because from our earthly perspectives, we're probably never going to understand it till we get there. Now, when people get there, they say, oh, wow, there's this perfect plan of creation. How could I have forgotten this beautiful, elegantly simple plan? And of course, when they come back into their earthly bodies, their earthly brains cannot fathom it. They can't hold that idea in their heads. But we're doing a very important job for our Heavenly Father and for all those in heaven. And that's why many near-death experiencers, when they get to heaven, sometimes they're guided to heaven by angels or relatives. And in heaven, you can hear the thoughts and sense the emotions of the people around you. And these near-death experiencers are saying, they're looking at me like a war hero, like I'm brave. Why do you think I'm some brave, courageous soul? And it's explained to them that those souls who decide to leave the love of heaven and experience fear, and you're going to be in these frail bodies and experience pain and separation, and you're going to be afraid to die, and you're going to experience cruelty, and some people experience horrible abusive situations, and you're not going to feel the love anymore. You're not even going to remember being there. And you do this for heaven so that we can all continue this. You're doing that hard work. Oh yeah. To those on the other side of the veil, we are the courageous ones. So, people sometimes when I do my spiritual counseling, they say, oh my gosh, it's just so hard. Why is life so hard? Because you're doing the tough job for heaven. It's supposed to be hard. This is the tough work. And it's only a blink of an eye compared to our eternal selves. It's not much suffering compared to our eternal selves. And we're never forced to come down here. You can stay in heaven. But if you really want to grow and learn, and you really want to help heaven out, you come down here and have a physical life. And that's what we're doing. So when you look around, Even the people that feel like they're failing in life, they are not. A human being on this planet, a generator of light and love, experiencing the fear-love duality. Oh, you're doing an amazing job for heaven. We are never meant to suffer in vain. There's a reason for what we go through, and it's a higher purpose, and it's all about love.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Well, you already answered my next question. That was very good. I was just going to ask about purpose of life. Not that that can really be completely answered, maybe, but he definitely addressed a lot of that.
We can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like, and give a few examples.
Oh, okay, sure.
So some near-death experiences, when they get to heaven, and they may say, well, why is my life so difficult? And it is shown to them that there are two ways to progress. Now, I used to think of God as static. Well, of course, God grows. Of course, creation grows. Look around you on earth, which is a reflection of heaven, as above, so below. Forests grow, people grow, cities grow, companies grow. There's growth everywhere. And that's part of the heavenly process. So it is explained to them that there are two ways to do things. There are two ways to accomplish a task of growth. You can do it slowly over time, or you can do it quickly, but that will generally involve pain and suffering. So if I have to go from where I am now on foot to 3 miles away, I can take a nice leisurely walk, and it'll take me an hour and a half or so, and it's comfortable. Or I can run as fast as I can and get there in only 20 minutes, maybe, but I'm going to suffer. My legs are going to hurt. I'm going to be out of breath. I'm going to be sweating. I'm going to be tired. And it's the same down here on earth. So when we decide to come down here on earth as souls, there are huge leaps and bounds in our growth and consciousness. As a matter of fact, it is such a good learning experience that there are only a few souls that are advanced to qualify for Earth. You got to be an advanced soul with a lot of experience to come down here to Earth, because it's the toughest planet in this galaxy to have a life. And for every 100 souls that want to come down here, there's only a body for one, because so many want to come down here to learn. Another example would be, you've got a 2-year-old child, and he's in the kitchen and he reaches towards the stove, the hot stove. Well, you can very slowly over time, every time he gets near the stove, say, no, 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 don't touch the stove, it's hot. And eventually he'll learn without any suffering. Or you can have the child learn quickly through suffering, and you let him touch the hot stove one time. And in 1/10 of a second, he learns very quickly. Experiencing the contrast also helps grow what we want. So how do you gain an appreciation for what you have an infinite amount of? You have an infinite amount of love in heaven. How do you appreciate that love? By experiencing the opposite, by experiencing fear. So who appreciates a good meal more? A billionaire who all his life grew up in a rich family, and there's a kitchen full of master chefs, and every meal's a gourmet meal, and he only eats in 5-star restaurants. He appreciates his meals. He's grateful for his food. But what about the guy who decides to have a life as a starving child in the streets of Haiti? And he's gone 3 or 4 days without eating. And he gets a plate of plain rice and beans, kind of a bland meal. It is hard for that billionaire to muster the kind of gratitude and the good feeling of eating that meal that the starving child in the streets of Haiti experiences. So when we experience the opposite, it strengthens that which we want. What happens when a loved one goes away on a long vacation for 3 or 4 months? My wife was away in Mexico for 3 months. She comes back. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. Right? There's a strengthening of that relationship. And so by experiencing the opposite, we strengthen the love of heaven. It's a very interesting process. And again, you can always stay in heaven and just advance slowly. But a lot of souls, brave souls, decide to come down here on earth. And they're honored in heaven for what they do.
Thank you. Okay, so what have you learned from the NDEs about the concept of what we call sin?
That's a great question. So sin is a term that brings about a whole range of things that we think of from a religious or earthly perspective. And that is, these are bad things. And if you do these bad things called sins, there's a punishment and there's consequences. In reality, we come down here to experience duality, to experience acting out of fear and acting out of love. And so a sin is just when you choose to act out of fear. And even when you choose to act out of fear, you learn. So, if I get in an argument with my wife, she does something I don't like, and I walk into the room screaming at her, she's going to scream back at me. And I'm going to experience how awful that feels to be in an argument with this woman that I love so much. Now, you could call that a sin, but it's a learning experience. So it is just an experience that is not the most direct path to love. It's a roundabout way. And sometimes it can just almost be a catalyst. If I walk into the room, I'm upset with my wife about something, and I very calmly say, listen, sweetie, you did this. And when you do that, it makes me feel this way. And I'm angry at you. And I don't want to be angry at you. So I want to ask for your help to resolve this. Well, that feels a lot better, because she responds in a better way. So you could call the negative experience sin if you wanted to, but it's just, they're both learning experiences. Everything that we experience down here, whether it's a negative or positive experience, is moving us in the direction of love. It is helping grow the fractal of creation. It's not there's no judgment. It's not like a mistake. You could consider it like a mistake. Those in heaven want us to choose the path of love, but it's the making the choices, experiencing the consequences, and learning from that causes the growth.
It's just a lesson.
It's a lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no judgment. I mean, long before your child is born, they're going to make a lot of mistakes in life. You don't, when your 2-year-old drops the glass and breaks it, you don't go off into a fit. Well, if you're a good father, you don't go off into a fit and tell him what a horrible child he is and say, I'm going to burn you in hell forever. It's just, well, he doesn't know what he's doing. We're down here. We don't know what we're doing. So we make a lot of mistakes, and heaven understands that. And they want us to learn from our mistakes. When we choose the path of fear, the point of that is learning from it. And next time, choose the path of love. But it all points us into the same direction.
Makes sense. So, yeah, I know I've run across some NDEs that talk about that God sees us like little children. So I think that's a perfect illustration of the child. Another side note here, I've done a little study on this word too in the Bible, and it's actually it's like to miss the mark or to go astray. So it really it doesn't have that kind of condemning component that we've added to it. It's really more of like missing the point, which of course is love. So that actually works perfectly. So yeah, I appreciate that. I think that ties things together. Well, thank you, David, for your time. I really appreciate the perspective you've added and all that you've been able to share with us. And I really appreciate all the NDEs have taught me and how they've kind of recentered my focus on what really matters most in life and enriched my relationship with God and with my neighbor. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Matthew. It was a pleasure being here on Lamplighter. And for anybody who wants to get in contact with me, if you have some follow-up questions, I'm still answering all emails at the time of this recording. You can go to godtookmyclothes.com and my email's there.